Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And welcome to today's Information Week webinar, Unified Communication Security, How Analytics Addresses the Threats You Don't Even Know About. It's sponsored by Ribbon and broadcast by Informa. My name is Peter Krause. I'm with Information Week, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we get started, I have a few very quick announcements. This webinar is designed to be interactive. There's a dock of widgets at the bottom of your screen that will help you to learn about today's speakers, download resources, share this webinar via social media outlets, and participate in the Q&A session that we'll have toward the end of the presentation. The slides will advance automatically. You can also download a copy of the slides, and that's also via the Resources widget. Toward the end of the webinar, I'll ask you to complete a short survey, and it's found on the right-hand side of your screen. Please take a minute to fill out the survey before you leave us today. Your feedback provides us with valuable information on how we can improve these events in the future. And finally, if during this webinar you have any technical problems or issues, please click the Help widget that's at the bottom of your screen. Or you can type your issue right into the Q&A area. Either way, we're here to offer one-on-one assistance. Okay, let's move on to our presentation. Unified Communications Security, How Analytics Addresses the Threats You Don't Even Know About. Discussing today's topic, we have two very experienced speakers. First of all, we've got Walter Kenrick. He's Senior Director of Product Management for Analytics and SaaS Applications at Ribbon Communications. Ribbon is a provider of voice-over IP security and cloud-native solutions. And Walter has more than 20 years of experience in product management and marketing for SIP security, big data, cloud, session border controllers, IP telephony solutions, and contact center applications. Prior to joining Ribbon, Walter held VP and director-level positions in product management and marketing at Cisco, Empirix, and Vertical Communications. Our other speaker today is Rich Krzan. He's in Analytics and Security Product Management at Ribbon, where he's responsible for driving the strategy, roadmaps, and requirements of the Ribbon Protect portfolio. Rich has been focused on voice-over IP for 22 years, and he also has experience in building customer solutions and managing high-tech products. Prior to working at Ribbon, Rich served as Director of Product Management at Genband, and he held multiple senior roles at Nortel. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Walter Kenrick. Walter.
Great. Thanks a lot, Peter. Appreciate everybody joining this afternoon or morning, wherever you may be. So for today, what we really wanted to cover, we wanted to talk about a number of the different types of threats that are occurring in the enterprise market, specifically the UC market. So we'll go into toll fraud. We'll talk about some of the risks, some of the scenarios, use cases around that. And then we want to go into how do we address analytics and what are some of the mitigation approaches that you should consider as you're looking at rolling out SIP-based services into your enterprise network or even your service provider network. We have a couple of case studies that we're going to go over, and then we are going to go into a live demo into our application so you can see how we do in the enforcement and the policy mitigation all the way through. And then we'll wrap up, take any questions that you may have. So let's go ahead and get started here. So UC has really opened up, a number of interesting threat vectors in the enterprise. So as we see the SIP trunking start to grow, we're starting to see more and more of the opportunities where bad actors are starting now to look at what is that path of least resistance and how can they take advantage of SIP trunking services, for example. So we all know that things like robocalls are very annoying, but they're these, say VoIP hacking rings. They're just a bunch of bad actors that are looking to kind of steal your UC services, and they're looking for ways to profit from them. And so UC security threats can have a huge financial implication on the enterprise. And we'll go through a couple of examples through today. We'll give you some insight on how big of a problem this really is. So if we look at fraud in general, we can start to see that UC is kind of really an attractive point of vulnerability for bad actors looking to attack your enterprise. If you think about UC, think about it like your office. It's got an external door, it's got windows, it's got air vents. So these bad actors will go around trying to examine all of those different vulnerabilities, looking for some type of point of entry. And once they get in, they can do a lot of damage. For example, around toll fraud. Here's just a couple of examples of toll fraud. And the amount of losses in 2017, this was a survey by the Communication Fraud Association, and they estimated it was around $29 billion in 2017 for fraud. And a lot of this is because of the endpoints, the VoIP endpoints through SIP, and being able to use those for dial-through toll fraud or even international revenue sharing fraud. They look at it as a way to kind of steal different types of services. And there was, the famous example, a lot of people you're probably familiar with, that there was an architect firm here in Massachusetts that dealt with really a protracted legal battle after somebody hacked into their the PBX, and they were a small architect firm, and they made like $900,000 worth of calls over a weekend to Somalia. So it was a huge lawsuit case back in, I think it was like 2009, but it just kind of goes to show you that these bad actors can rack up huge amounts of financial implications for small businesses or even large businesses, and we have a couple more examples through our customers and how we've achieved them, helped them achieve mitigation of this fraud. So earlier this year, we did a survey, and we asked our customers a number of different questions, but one of them was, has your company been the victim of any of the following? And so we kind of give the breakdown, whether it was toll fraud or DDoS attack, robocallers, or none of the above. And what we found was that 62 of the respondents out of this survey, and you can see there was close to 1,300 respondents that came, and they said that they had been somewhat of a victim of one of these types of attacks. Now, the 38%, Rich, I would assume that they had probably never even known that they were attacked.
Yeah, in many cases, like when they're reviewing the information, they don't get and understand they have been attacked until they get their bill for the month for their services that were from the carrier itself.
Right.
And that's where a lot of these surprises happen.
And if they're not looking at it closely, you may get may just, be a few dollars, a few $100s that may go unnoticed, but over time that racks up, and obviously the bad actors profit from that.
Yeah, and another thing here is these talk about some of the specific UC attacks, but UC is just another protocol in IP itself. So a lot of times, if you are having a data infiltration, we have exfiltration listed here, but the chances are if you're getting attacked this way through your SIP and the UC, you're also at least being probed, if not attacked, at the IP and firewall level too.
Great point. So let's go ahead and just ask this quick survey for all of our people out there and listening to the webinar. Who do you believe should be responsible for protecting your company from UC security issues? Is it your partner or systems integrator that implemented your UC service? Is it your UC provider, whether it's kind of a hosted UC or just somebody providing SIP trunks to you? Or is it your company, yourself, that is solely responsible? So we'll give a second. So, Rich, how do you think people will respond to this particular question?
Where's the government? Shouldn't the government be protecting me, Walter, here? I mean,
well, maybe they should, but that's not going to happen today.
Yeah, we see a lot of this, and I've talked with many different enterprises and carriers, and a lot of them come back and either they feel their carrier should be doing it or they feel their carrier is already doing it, but the way they're doing it, they're maybe not happy with it.
So let's go ahead and see what kind of results we had. So, interesting. So we had 28.6 said it was their partner. 14% said it was their UC or SIP trunk provider. And majority obviously said it was themselves. Now, that's pretty interesting data. Is that what you would have expected?
Yeah, I mean, that feels like a good breakdown. I mean, over half the people feel that ultimately they are responsible, but you may lean on some of these other people. And some of those cases we've seen, like with the UC service provider themselves, I've heard stories where, yes, we had international toll fraud, so our carrier shut down all our international traffic. So it's kind of the whole, a hammer to solve all solutions.
Right. So let's go ahead and kind of see how survey. So we actually asked that very same question in this survey that we did back in March of earlier this year, and we asked, who do you believe should be responsible for protecting your company from UC services? And what we found is 85%, which is quite different than what we had here, said that the UC provider should be protecting them. Now, what's interesting is that if you look at, some of the legal language, the contracts that these UC providers have, and I don't know how well it's resonating, the resolution here is on the screen, but where on the underline it says, your company is responsible for securing its phone system and paying for any usage charges that may occur through fraudulent activity. So while a lot of the enterprise customers that we found expected that the UC provider should protect them, they're actually saying the reverse. They're saying you're responsible for it. So pretty interesting take on that end. And that's exactly what happened to that use case that I mentioned earlier about the 900K calls to Somalia. The poor gentleman, he was responsible and it became a big problem.
You mentioned that one, and I think you said it went to a legal battle. Now, that was with the guy who attacked him, or what? It
was with the service provider.
Oh.
So they actually went to the one of his service was actually with one of the tier 1 providers, but it was an actual another tier 1 provider had a dial around long distance service. And so the bad actor was able to get in, use his PBX to use that dial around long distance service back at the time. And while that secondary service provider acknowledged the calls were fraudulent, they argued that that little small business owner, should have put more safeguards to protect his phone system, and that the service provider, can collect charges from the owner of that phone line that was used to make the calls.
So similar to our respondents here today, they felt like ultimately, the guy, you were responsible.
Exactly. Now they were able to resolve that, which is all good, but obviously a big problem. Okay, so why don't we go ahead and transition now. We're going to talk a little bit more specific about how we can start to use analytics for fraud mitigation.
Great. So let me take that, Walter, on this one. So kind of when you're looking at detecting fraud and everything, it is all about analytics, and it is about assessing the information. You are pulling the data from the system, and then you want to detect the information, pulling data from the network, what's going on to detect different things. You'll then use different algorithms, analytics, heuristics here in the picture to predict what's trying to occur in the system. And then you want the ability to set up policies or alerts to be able to respond to these events. So then you can actually interpret and kind of get ahead of the system there. That then allows you to push mitigations out into the network that can prevent prevent the damage from occurring at the beginning, or prevent the damage from continuously occurring, making it worse and worse into the system itself. The whole point here is that you are looking at an analytics type of solution as opposed to a point solution, so you can look holistically at the network, look at all the traffic going through, and try to analyze that and be able to have a single point to manage the policies and securing your network holistically. Okay? So one way in doing that, we're talking about the fraud scenarios and the examples, Walter, that you were giving. It's really fraud. We keep talking about fraud, toll fraud, all that kind of dial-through fraud. It's all about, and I keep using analytics. It is about behavioral analytics looking for anomalies. In the case here, we're taking two different examples and looking at a subscriber and looking at actual target DN numbers. It could be looking at trunk groups. It could be aggregating the data differently. But ultimately, you're looking for behavior analytics to create a model of how your system acts in the enterprise at different times of the day, and then looking for the differences of the calling patterns now compared to what you expect to occur. And then you can flag those with some level of confidence to be investigated for further traffic, for further analysis, have your security team go look into it, whether it's an IP address or a phone number. Or maybe it's okay because Walter's traveling in Europe. So yes, he is making calls at 3 a.m. as far as the PBX is concerned. But you need to have that identification first so you know what to go look for, that you even have a problem. And do it quickly, not wait for the end of the month's bill.
So if I'm on a weekend and tons of calls are going to a high-cost destination across my entire network and I have multiple sites, hopefully with analytics, I would be able to catch that type of scenario?
Yeah, because you're looking at it not at a single point in your network. You're looking at all the traffic being aggregated and run through your network to analyze what's going on from the subscribers and the actual call destinations. You may have legitimate business in Uzbekistan and making calls out there, or South Africa, or Somalia. You may have a little site office there. But what you might be looking for is, are you calling the same number all the time? That's okay, but if you're calling bigger blocks of numbers or more periods of numbers, so then maybe you want to kind of investigate that, put some thresholds there that actually stop and identify that as anomalous behaviors. Great. Okay. So you look for, and I talked about the behavior and the fraud. Now, when that is characterized, then you want to treat that actually as an incident. So that incident now is identified. That is the findings, the anomalous behaviors. So once those thresholds are crossed, then using analytics, you can flag that, and then that gives you the ability, the opening to actually go into and allow some mitigation or responses into your network. And then looking here, we'll see this in the demo, but this kind of table shows you some information on what the type of threat it is, what's the information from it within our solution itself, and then some of the controls you have on the mitigations.
Awesome. Can't wait for the demo.
Yes, I think you're going to walk us through the demo also.
Yeah.
We kind of said this earlier, but it is about a holistic approach here. And some of the other points that we kind of been noting. We are looking at analytics of all the systems traffic going through. We're looking at all the calls, so it doesn't really matter if only calls from Richmond are making calls out there, or in some cases, if the bad actor is sophisticated enough, they can do a distributed attack. And you've heard of denial of service attacks. You can also have a distributed denial of service attack. They may know that your call center has multiple trunk groups in different cities, and they can actually attack them all at once and kind of stay under an individual site threshold, but holistically they're pumping hundreds of dollars through your system per minute. So they can kind of maintain that level. So what we do is when we look at a holistic view, we can see that and grab that because we can exceed it at multiple points throughout an aggregated amount. But the other thing we can do, we can look at that pinpoint information. So for example, an SBC is a security border gateway. They have a job to protect you from special SIP information, SIP attacks. At the same time, as an analytic solution, we can look at the reports from those security devices and take action on those too. So in this case here, you may be having a malformed SIP packets occurring at a high rate. That SBC will automatically take action, put an ACL, and block that IP address because that's what their job is. But what it doesn't know is that same person, that same IP address that's attacking it, also has a probe device trying to send other SIP information through other SBCs, or even trying to do an FTP or SSH firewall attack into your same network. So in that case, as a holistic view on the network, we can grab the information that one SBC saw as a malformed SIP packet and then push that out to other firewalls and other SBCs to block the same traffic.
Very cool. All right, so now I think that was excellent kind of overview, Rich, that you had. So I think we want to go into just a couple of success stories that we've seen within our customer base, maybe shine a little bit more light. But before we do, got another poll that we have. So pretty easy, yes, no, I don't know. Has your company been a victim of a fraud attack? So based on the people in this webinar, what do you think? 60-40, 70-30?
Well, they were kind of bang on with the 60% feeling of it themselves. So I think it's going to be in the 80s.
I think it's going to be in the 80s. All right. So why don't we go ahead? We've given you a couple seconds to answer. Hopefully everybody had a chance. So let's see what we got here. Whoa,
Ooh.
Interesting. So we see a pretty even split between yes and I don't know.
Oh, that is interesting.
Yeah. And so, 75% either said yes or I don't know, and then no is at 25%. So very interesting kind of numbers. I don't think I expected the 25% to be that high,
yeah.
But
well, one thing it makes sense, right? No one wants to broadcast, hey, we've had a security attack.
True.
So it is something that the IT groups like to hold close to their vest.
Well, let's go into a couple of examples where people have had some security attacks.
Sure. So some of the cases, and I've talked to a lot of different customers, obviously pitching the product and everything there. And some of the examples here, this one here, a Skype hijacking, right? So we talked to a Fortune 500 company. They were notified by their carrier that they had a lot of international calls going on. Well, after looking into it a little bit, they figured out that their Skype system, their actual Skype conference bridge, was been hacked. So people internationally were given out the local dial-in for their Skype bridge, and they would dial into the Skype bridge and be able to make long-distance calls effectively through that. So they were effectively, I don't know if it's kind of a toll fraud scenario. And this happened over multiple times and to the excess of $100,000. So when they worked with their carrier, they said, well, we want you to block those calling numbers that are coming in, getting into our Skype bridge. So great, they blocked those numbers. Now it solved the problem. Oh, lo and behold, a few weeks later, the people changed the numbers they were calling from. So there we go, we're starting all over again. And this cycle then, they have to wait for the next month of billing to come in and see that this is now occurring. So a better resolution would be putting in an application that's doing continuous analytics and analysis on your calls and your network, not waiting for the end of the month billing assessment that you try to do reconciliation between your UC system, your VoIP system, and what your Tier 1 carrier is providing you. If you're doing it in even hours long, but really we get down to minutes long analysis of the different calls going in the system, you can catch this early. And as soon as they start changing those dialing numbers, you can actually start and put blocks on your side to prevent them from coming in themselves.
Right, and we know that those bad actors are going to continuously change their calling patterns because they know that people are going to catch up to them, and they're always going to look to how they can generate more revenue and circumvent any type of security constraints that are.
Yes, it's the age-old attack defense. The solutions for solving some problems do get solved, and new problems come in, and you just it's a continuous evolution of your protecting your network.
Absolutely.
Okay. And another one, dial-through fraud. So this is the case where you were kind of mentioning the gentleman had the huge international bill. Effectively, someone broke in to their UC system. Either they got the password for their SIP trunk or they hijacked someone's SIP client and able to dial in and then have the number rerouted out. In this case, went out to European numbers. And for one-time charges, it massed over $200,000 in fees. So this, again, is a very hard case, but if you actually start using analytics, and we talked about the behavior analytics there, that you can look at this and see what are my standard calling patterns, where should I really be calling. I may not want to block that first time you call Albania, right?
Right.
But if you're calling Albania and you've never called them before, it's fine. But now if I made 5 calls in 10 minutes, and now if I made 500 calls in 10 minutes, I really may want to kind of take an action to maybe stop those calls and then talk to you. Say, hey, Walter, why are you making all these calls Albania, right? So having the ability to now first analyze and see that problem occurring, and then be able to take a mitigation action that's not permanent. So in this case, I don't have to call my carrier, put in a case, put in a ticket to have them block this information. They come back and we go a little bit back and forth. I can stop this at my side and have a little bit more control over the capabilities of what's going on there.
So putting the control right back into the customer's hands.
Right, making you responsible.
Making them responsible. Awesome. Great use cases. So now we're going to transition a little bit. We want to go into a demo to kind of show you how we can detect fraudulent occurrences and be able to mitigate those in the network. We're also going to show you how we can revert them back out, because as Rich was explaining, you know, if I'm making a lot of phone calls, maybe you want to block my number. Somebody hacked into my user account and made a lot of phone calls to, say, you know, high premium destination, but you don't want to stop forever. You just want to maybe stop it for a day or an hour or whatever the time frame is. So you want to be able to back out those changes without touching every network device. And so that's essentially what we're going to show you in this demo that we have coming up here right now. So let's go in.
Welcome to the Ribbon Protect Fraud Protection demo. In this demo, we'll see how we can detect and flag potential fraudulent use of communication network resources by unauthorized users. Now let's begin. So let's go into the actual demo. Here we're logging in. We're brought into one of the dashboards. This is the networking monitoring dashboard, which is my default home dashboard. But I want to look at the security aspect. So I want to go over to my threat dashboard. And here it'll bring me up, and I can see current threats that are active in the network. I can see origin with the geo-mapping capabilities we have. See trends that are going on over the course of time with certain threats. I'm very interested in fraud, so I have a specific dashboard for that. And then I can also see the number of resolved threats. So what we're first looking at is subscriber monitor incident, and this tracks the behavior of subscribers, and it uses metrics such as attempts, duration of calls, calling or called number, the types of calls, whether they're international or local, various elements there. The other type is a target monitor incident, and so the target tracks the incident of activity of called numbers in the network, and they are grouped by prefixes. So it works very similar, except for we're looking at where the calls are going in the network to be able to stop them from doing any financial damage to the organization. Again, it'll focus on particular high-rate calls. So in this, we're going to go over to the incidents table, and we're going to see that we can choose based on the type of incident that might be raised. The application, we can sort by the various applications. We may want to sort by the bad actor or maybe some of the details. But in this case, we're going to look at the Fraud Sentry application. And so here, it'll bring up the list of different types of subscriber and target monitors. I can sort by date, so I can bring the most current. And I see that we have an active incident here with this 817 number. So I can do a number of things. I could look at the life cycle, but I want to mitigate this. So I click on the mitigate, and it brings me the incident details. I get a confidence score to make sure that it's, we're highly confident that something as bad is happening. And then I have a couple of different actions. I can block that call number, or I can ignore the incident altogether. So in this case, this 817 number, we want to be able to determine that it's not part of the SBC configuration. So I go over to my call routing to see if there's any rule set up to block that particular number. And as you can see in the SBC here, there's no entry to block that specific call it number. So I can go in and say, for the mitigation, block that calling number, which is that prefix 8174, and I can go and click mitigate. And so what happens is it goes off. Ribbon Protect will do an automatic enforcement policy down to all of the SBCs in the network that are configured within the Ribbon Protect platform. And I can go in and see, okay, here it's my mitigating. And I can go off and also check on the status of that. So I bring up the life cycle. I see it's been applied to both the SBC-A as well as the Barton SBC, which I'm showing here in this demo. So I go and refresh the route that's been configured, and I can see it's automatically entered into the SBC. So what happens is Ribbon Protect, through some integration, pushes down that policy directly into the network across your entire SBC, and for that matter, we can even pass policy down into firewalls as well. So here, we're going to go back to the incidents table. We'll be able to monitor the state of that particular number, so we'll do a search on the bad actor, which is 817. It'll bring up a list of different types of incidents that are raised. We'll sort based on the fraud application, and we can see now that we're in a monitor state. So we basically want to monitor that for a little while to make sure that everything is still working as expected until we close that particular incident out in its entirety. Now, so we've solved that. No more traffic will get through, but perhaps we want to reverse the process. We want to now remove that rule that we applied to blocking that called number. So we can go off and we can click this revert button, and it'll ask us, do we want to do this? We say yes. And so that brings the whole reversal process. So instead of manually going and touching every SBC or every firewall, we can go in and have a rule that will revert that policy back out of the network. As you can see here, we've successfully done that to both SBCs. We'll bring up the SBC. We'll refresh the route listing that we have here, and you'll see the 817 is no longer part of that. So we were able to, one, mitigate, and two, be able to reverse that policy back out with the Ribbon Protect tool, which makes it extremely powerful. And quite frankly, nobody else is doing this that we're aware of within our communications space. So we can go back, we can take a look at the incidents table, but for this particular demo, I'm going to go back to my dashboard, look for my next type of action that I want to take. Maybe it's against excessive call rate or something like that. So here you have the Ribbon Protect stopping fraud. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Walter, for walking us through that demo.
Yeah, it was, granted, it was, it's a lot of time to kind of pull it together, but hopefully the audience was able to see that stopping fraud is not just detecting fraud, but it's actually, passing policy back down to the network. That's really where the real value is, because if I can see it, I want to be able to stop it immediately. And if I have 10 network devices or 100 network devices, if I have to touch them all individually, that would be very problematic in terms of just the maintenance and kind of all the configuration changes that may. So if I can have something scripted that goes out, and that's where, as you know, our customers find a huge amount of value.
Yeah, it's an orchestrated security mitigation device.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I mean, one of the points in the demo you did go through, and for the demo you do need to show it out. But in the system itself, you can set that up to automatically respond to those without having someone set in. And I think you even mentioned earlier, if you're not comfortable some of the blocking, you can set up to automate it and then just block it for an hour or two.
Absolutely. Yeah, so it's the beauty of the platform.
A lot of power and capability and customization.
Okay. So you want to take us through our portfolio?
Sure. Well, yeah, so let's talk a little bit. We focused on the security and fraud aspects of it, and we've been using that A word a lot, analytics. It is all about analytics, but what the beauty of that brings to you is, since you are doing it, and we focused on security and TDOS and DOS prevention, mitigation, Beyond that, you now have all that data that the analytics is providing you, giving you operational insight, allowing you to do QoS monitoring. You can look at quality experience, look at your network management, be able to predict, well, how many SIP trunks do I really need in the network? Well, I'm collecting all that data because I'm looking for security. I can now use that data and do other types of analysis on my network, and even branch out into the data analytics side where you're doing a monetization. Can I look at my marketing? Where are my agents all calling? Is one agent calling the same people all the time? I can actually start pulling that information that a standard UC, a call center, would want to see and be able to monetize and kind of understand their traffic itself.
As well as getting into all the mobile traffic. So if you think about analytics, because we're pulling data from the devices or tapping into the network themselves, whether it's a fixed network, an enterprise network, or even a mobile network, we can now pull in all that data and aggregate it together to understand subscriber patterns, for quality of care, for certainly a fraud application. So no matter what type of network you're in, the analytics will be able to spread across all of those different types of network deployments.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that's one point we talk about it in some of our specific product discussions is it's an analytics platform that has applications that run on it.
Absolutely.
And then those applications are looking for specific things. In this case, we're talking about fraud.
Yep. So, Rich, I think that was a very informative webinar today. Thank you for your time, and thank you for the audience members. So, Peter, I think we're open for some questions, if there's any out there.
Indeed we are. Walter and Rich, thanks. That was a great presentation. We're going to go to Q&A. Before we do, though, I want to remind everyone about that survey I mentioned earlier on. It's available on the right of the presentation window, and we hope you'll fill it out. If you've closed the survey, you can reopen the widget. Just click the icon along the bottom of your screen. Again, thanks for filling out the feedback form. Your participation helps us to serve you better in the future. And now we're going to move on to our Q&A. It's not too late to ask a question, still plenty of time. To participate, simply type your question into the text box that's located to the right of the presentation window, or you can click on the Q&A icon that's at the bottom of your screen. And let us see what we've got in the Q&A. We've got some questions. Good. Here's our first one. What does it take to implement an analytics solution like the one that you just described? What's it take to implement?
So Peter, what we focus on in our implementation around analytics is we try to build a solution that pulls information from the existing network devices as opposed to forcing a bunch of probes and detections and changing the actual call routing information. So like a lot of solutions out there, maybe it's a hosted solution. They want you to send them your CDRs. They want you to route your calls to them. What we focused on is a solution that can actually pull information as it's being created through pulling CDRs from SBCs, from pulling statistics and information from UC systems, and analyze that information there. Now, with that in mind, it is not an appliance-based solution. It's a hypervised, virtualized solution that can run on a VMware, KVM, or you can even run it in AWS if that's where your network lives.
And just to stress, certainly having ribbon devices in your network's a plus, but it doesn't have to be just ribbon network devices. We can pull data from really any third-party device that's out there. We have mechanisms to where we can either pull or push directly into the platform. And as Rich said, being a probeless environment, I think, is extremely important as you get into these enterprise environments because there's already so many probes out there. People are trying to avoid them.
Okay, good. Our next question. Aren't I already protected because doesn't an SBC or firewall, especially with a SIP ALG, doesn't that protect my network from UC threats, including fraud?
Well, if you think about it, an SBC really only kind of protects just that single node of your network. And so if I'm a bad actor, as Rich explained, during the webinar, they're going to try to infiltrate all different areas of your network. So if I'm smart, I'll stay below certain CAC thresholds to ensure that I'm not detected, and I'll be able to rack up, any type of major fraud charges, or maybe I'm just going to sit there and do surveillance of your network, looking for attack later on in time. So in SBC, while it's a great and secures your network, it's only for that particular node. And same thing with a firewall. So a firewall, we did a lot of testing with, and we found that even with the SIP ALG, it's an application level gateway for SIP that a lot of the vendors have. Google it, and the first thing will probably pop up is how to disable it. And the problem is that the SIP parsers, they really don't understand SIP. I mean, we're from a communications that grew up on SIP, so we have that domain experience to really understand how these attack vectors. So if you get, like in a firewall, the ports are timed, they're not dynamic. All UC communications is dynamic. Ports are opening and closing on a dynamic level. And if I'm just on a timer base, which is mostly what a firewall, then I'm leaving ports open maybe for a period of time that a bad actor could conceivably sneak in. So there's a lot of vulnerabilities, especially in the SIP world, that firewall just doesn't do it justice. Obviously, that's why there's SBCs, but aggregating all that data is truly the only way that you can really detect any type of, say, fraudulent situations across the network.
Yeah, and in some of the examples we gave in our use cases, all those were done with valid SIP information, right? It was at the next layer on rerouting the calls or tricking somebody to make phone calls out, which are completely all valid SIP protocol paths.
Right, exactly.
Okay, good.
Okay.
We have a few more questions. I just want to remind everyone in the audience, we can still take your questions, and you can just type them into the Q&A area, and Walter and Rich will give it a try. Our next question, how do you, at Ribbon, how do you help protect against call spoofing and nuisance calls? Call spoofing and nuisance calls.
Well, I mean, I'll start off and then I'll let Rich chime in. So there's a couple of different ways on how we address that. Nuisance calls, all the robocallers that are out there is very problematic, not only in, kind of from a landline, but, enterprise perspective. And they've drawn national attention from the FCC. So we have a couple of different ways of being able to handle that. One way is with a STIR/SHAKEN solution. So STIR is basically a framework to authenticate through digital certificates calls and be able to verify them on the back end. So that's one way that we have a solution, but I'm not going to stress that because we're focused on analytics today. The other way is really through analytics and being able to detect anomalous calling patterns, and also to embed third-party databases of known bad actor or rogue nuisance calls that have been made. So if we can detect those types of calls, we can assign a score. We can apply policy back down into a routing engine to stop those calls right in a real-time nature, so they don't affect the users in their enterprise. So the use of analytics through looking at robocallers, being able to do some call matching patterns, as well as tie it in with third-party databases, whether it's an FCC or NomoRobo or Haya or whomever it may be, is really kind of the way, probably one of the best ways to stop those types of scenarios.
Yeah, I mean, honestly speaking, complex spoofing cannot be stopped. The only things you can do is look for improper digits, improper numbers, look for kind of certain scenarios there. But generically speaking, if the number is a valid type of number coming from a valid trump point, there's nothing in the SIP messages that can tell you it's spoofed beyond some of the things that Walter, you were outlining. You can pull in third-party databases that can help do that, which are used crowdsourcing information, or even FCC type of databases that our systems can analyze. Beyond that, it is about behavior analytics.
Okay. All right, great. Next question. What are the trade-offs between an on-premises-based SBC versus a cloud-based Ribbon SBC implementation? What are the trade-offs?
Yeah, so, I mean, we're certainly talking about analytics here, but not necessarily SBCs per se, but, you know, we can go ahead and answer that. You know, I think it's really a matter of what the end customer really wants from a deployment. So if you're moving to kind of a hosted type of solution, you're comfortable with cloud solutions, whether it's been AWS or Azure or even Google Cloud. There's certainly benefits. There's some total cost of ownership benefits of moving to the cloud. You know, you certainly don't have to worry about rack space. You don't have to worry about power. You know, it's kind of just a monthly bill that you would pay. And we certainly have solutions that fit that, both from, you know, a public cloud architecture, but, you know, also from a working right on premises. So, you know, if I look at it from a scaling, I think both tend to scale similarly. You may get more known performance out of an on-premise hardware-based solution, and it'll be more user-defined performance as you get into a cloud hosted. So depending on how much horsepower, that'll give you, you know, whatever performance that, you know, say a Ribbon as a provider would provide for you. But we can certainly, you know, the person that asked the question certainly wants more information. We can give you a lot of information on kind of some of the benefits of both types of solutions and what the trade-offs may be.
Yeah, there's no feature differences within them.
Absolutely not. One thing that I would say, and that's a good point, Rick, is that when you're looking at whether it's a cloud, you know, cloud-hosted public or private cloud versus an on-premise hardware solution, if you have to give up features or, you know, any type of capabilities, then that manufacturer, you know, that vendor is not doing you a service. I would look elsewhere, because you should have parity no matter, you know, if the exact same solutions on-prem in a hardware solution or in the cloud, the feature parity, you know, should absolutely be there.
That's a good point. So we shouldn't be making any feature sacrifices moving to the cloud. All right.
Yeah.
All right, our next question. This person is interested in implementing analytics to block and protect fraud. Is there any limit, or they're asking what size of enterprise does your solution cover? So I guess the question is sort of, are there limits, or is it best for a certain size enterprise over others?
Yeah, so I would say, you know, if you have a phone system and, you know, there's certainly no limit on, you know, what size. There's different deployment methodologies, certainly, to achieve, say, a smaller one, you know, whether it's kind of a hosted analytics type of solution that we could provide for them versus on-prem for maybe a larger solution. So we had a case up here in Nashua. It was a veterinary office, and they ran into a TDOS attack, and their provider could not stop it. And the attacker basically said, unless you pay me, I think it was like $1,400 in Bitcoin, no calls are going to get through to your vet office. And so, you know, person, you know, was able to remedy it, I think, with their service provider. But, you know, you don't want to get in those situations to where you have to go back and forth with the service provider. You want to stop that, you know, right in its tracks, as, you know, the survey suggested that we did here today in the poll question. Take control of your own environment. So whether you're small or certainly large, I think there's an opportunity for analytics and stopping these different types of attacks on the UC network.
Yeah, a lot of our discussions have been holistic and look at the network view. And the reason we talk about that is because that is a harder thing to do, because you're pulling from multiple points in your network and trying to aggregate the data together that the individual UC devices don't do today. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect about the upper layers of the calls with the calling rates and where the calls are going, that's still something that's completely valid from an analytics solution if you have one SBC and one UC system, or if you have 3 sites over 2 different states and have a centralized Skype deployment. That all still works the same.
Okay, great. Well, it looks like we've answered all the questions. Walter, Rich, any closing statements, closing comments for our audience before we end?
No, I mean, I think if I'm not correct, you can get a lot more information on what we have to offer, through some of the websites. So I believe they get access to these web links, but you can go out to ribboncommunications.com. Look under security analytics, and you can get a lot more information on, how we can help solve any type of particular problems, whether it's fraud or TDOS or robocalling or really any type of network security issues. We're here to help. So.
And thank you, Peter.
Okay. I'd like to thank our sponsor, Ribbon, as well as everyone in the audience. We certainly appreciate your attention and participation. I just want to let you know that within the next 24 hours, you'll receive a personalized follow-up email. This will contain details and a link to today's presentation on demand. Please invite your colleagues and peers who couldn't join us today to attend the event on demand. This webinar is copyright 2019 by Informa. The presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted by Information Week and Ribbon, and the individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and opinions. On behalf of our guest speakers, Walter Kenrick and Rich Curzan of Ribbon, I'm Peter Krass with Information Week. I'd like to thank you for your time and have a great rest of your day.